Today, we'll go back to English, and I just want to do kind of an overall practice day now that we've gone through all of the concepts. We talked about how to do your easy questions, right? All of the different rule ones. And then we talked about the harder kind of process-based questions already, right? So we kind of covered both of those things. Now the entire test is just knowing how to do it and actually doing it. So I've taught you all the different things we can kind of discuss outside of the actual book, and now we just need to do it. So today I kind of want to just practice through and run through a bunch of different passages and those types of questions that we can see that we've talked about. I'll point out things that we've covered that should be in your notes now, in case we'll just see kind of the frequency of the things that we talk about, how much they pop up. And that's kind of the plan for today, so just practice. So can everyone pull out, yours will look different, but the 10 ACT practice book, it'll be blue, I think now. And perfect timing, everything's off now. And then, can somebody check for me page 597? Good? We haven't done that one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's passage 1?
Yep.
So I know they change the page numbers sometimes. Okay, perfect. So we'll go from there. Let's try to do 2 at a time if we can today. Let's see if we can get through 4. I might be pushing it here, but so this first run we'll go. Let's try to do 1 through 30. So we'll go 2 passages, and then traditionally you have about 9 minutes for these, right? So I'll give you the full 18 right now, and then the second we'll try to do 2 passages again. And I'll try to push you for time just so we can practice being under some time pressure also, just in case that does happen. I'm not saying it will, and for most of you it probably won't. But in case it does, you'll just be prepared for it and you will have seen it before. So also, I'm not going to force you to do this. Normally in the past I have, but today I'll leave it up to you. Flip back 2 pages from where you are right now. We're on page 597. Flip back 2 pages, there's a bubble sheet. So if you'd like to practice with that, rip that out, and then you'll get some practice with doing that too. And there's some strategy with that as well about how you're going to bubble. Have we talked about this already? With bubbling? Maybe? No? No. Okay. So I want to mention this really quick also. On the test, this is very important because this is done. There's a lot of scientific studies about this and how this is going to improve your performance. So I just want to mention this quick. Just because we're talking about it, let's everyone rip out the bubble sheet and we'll use it today. Sorry. I was going to make it optional, but let's actually do it. This will be good practice. So, there's a little thing about the difference between taking a test on paper and then going in the answer there versus bubbling it on a different sheet, right? So there's a little more time, and there's some additional strategy with the time, but there's also a thing about your concentration. And I've talked about over and over again how important this is, because the ACT is a rhythm test, right? When you're in rhythm, it's easier, and when you're out of rhythm and things aren't going so well, it gets worse and worse and worse. And it cascades, so if things are going good, they're going super good. If they're going bad, they're probably going super bad, right? So there's something to be said about that, and there's some ways that we can use this to our advantage, especially with the bubble sheet. So how many of you, when you've taken the test before, if you practiced with the bubble sheet, answer it here, and then I bubble it in. And then I go back, answer this question, and then bubble it in. Most of you do that? Or do you finish the whole passage and then bubble them all? Or do you finish the whole test and then bubble all 75 of them? Nobody's ever bubbled anything before? You normally do 1 at a time, right? Is that the normal thing most people do? Okay, and I think that's totally okay. I'm going to recommend, and I hope that you all will take my advice, is to do 15 questions. So complete the passage in the book, using your pencil in the book. Then stop, bubble all 15 of those. And then we're going to go back and do the next one. And we're going to do that over and over again. I'm not saying do this above everything else. If you have 5 minutes left and you're under a ton of time pressure and you still have the whole passage, don't waste your time trying to do the whole thing on the paper and then bubble. So if you're under time pressure, everything I say goes out the window, right? Then you just bubble or do whatever works, right? But the reason I recommend, and Manoj recommends, and most of the other tutors, if you ask them, I'm assuming, would say that also, is there's some science to it. So there's an effect. Has anyone heard of the halo effect before? It's a thing basically where the first thing you do basically affects way more the next thing you do. So if I'm grading a paper, right, and question 1 is really good, then I'm more likely to grade question 2 higher. Or if you're taking a test, for example, and question 1 is really easy, you'll feel the next ones are easier also, right? I've kind of talked about this before. So this also holds true with bubbling. So if you go through, you're kind of da-da-da-da, oh, this isn't going so well, and you just keep going, you're going to do worse than if you stop, reset yourself, and then go again, right? So this is a really nice way to be able to do that, and it resets you each time. So it turns out the period that you need for that kind of like reset to happen is between 15 and 30 seconds. Hey, that's crazy. If you finish an entire passage and then you turn away, you're probably going to bubble for 15 or 30 seconds, right? So this is a really nice way to reset in between each passage. So it's going to help you a lot in that way. Another situation we've had with students in the past sometimes is they'll mix up information from different passages. So passage 1 was about, this happens more in reading than English, but it happens in English, where passage 1 was about penguins, and then passage 2 was about megalodons. And they sometimes will answer a question in the second passage about the penguins instead of the megalodons. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I know it's a terrible example, but sometimes it's easy to mix up information, and when you take these pauses to bubble everything off to the side, it kind of gets rid of that. This break helps your mind kind of separate the two things and then move forward. And a lot of the time, this is going to benefit your rhythm more than hurt it when you have these pauses, these little breaks in between. So it's super important. I recommend doing this in English reading, obviously, and science, because they're passage-based, right? Math, people will say different things. My recommendation with math is to complete all of the questions on the page, bubble those in. Complete the entire next page, then bubble those in. That one I'm not as strict on because I don't know how well the science would translate to that. But the other things are pretty well studied things, and so that I would recommend you do that. Now, of course, these things are general population studies, right? So if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. But my recommendation is complete the passage, then bubble. Does that make sense? So today when you're practicing, if you'd like to try that, that would be great. You don't have to, but feel free to. I'm going to let the timer run for 18 minutes. We're going to go through passages 1 and 2. If you finish early, just give me a wave so that I know kind of where people are finishing. Online, if you are done with the passages, hit the little hand raise emoji, and then you're good. You can just kind of sit. And then we'll come back together at the end of the 18 minutes and talk about them. Does everyone understand the instructions? So 1 through 30, okay? Okay, and then practice with the bubble sheet. Okay. Go ahead. Can everyone see the timer? Sorry, I want to make sure everyone can see.
It's kind of hard for me to see the timer.
I'll move it closer. Oops. Not what I wanted to do. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I let it go to 19 minutes there. These two were a little bit harder than the ones we've done in the past. You guys think so too? A little bit harder? Yeah. Normally this book runs pretty easy, so we don't normally run into a ton of time trouble here, but just gave a little extra because these ones are fairly tricky. Did everyone feel okay about the bubbling? Everyone got their bubbles filled? Okay, so people have 30 bubbles filled right now. Okay. Don't grade off of this, grade off of the sheet for now, okay? So I'm going to read the answers, but just look at the bubble sheet for now. It'll just make this go a little bit faster. Okay, I'll go over the answers 1 through 30 here, and then we can talk about them. Starting at 1, C, F, D, F, D. It's the first 5. Starting at 6, H, A, J, B, F. Starting at 11, C, J, B, G, A. That's the first 15 there, so we'll start at 16. J, B, F, D, G gets you to 20. 21, F, B, starting at 21, my bad. B, F, C, H, C. That's through 25. And then starting at 26, F, D, F, D, G. That's all 30. Does anyone need any of those repeated? I know I went kind of fast. Everyone got them? Okay. All right. Let's go through any people found difficult or any of them that people got wrong here. And it's easier if you just ask more questions because I'm going to have to go over a bunch of them anyway, so it's just easier if I know what you guys did wrong. So I'll go over a few that I found notable anyway, but let's start with the ones that you guys had trouble with. Even if you got them right, if you just had trouble with it or it was confusing at all, if there's a rule maybe you don't understand, or the two of them kind of look right here and none of these look right, anything that you guys found difficult throughout this. 19. Okay, we're starting at question 19. Yeah, very good. So this one was one I was going to talk about anyway. So this is one of those that kind of fits into that. Do you remember we did hard questions? We did like relevance meaning. That's kind of where this fits in. So the writer's considering deleting the first part of the preceding sentence. So right now the sentence reads, because it is a migratory bird, early spring is generally the first opportunity, da-da-da. And the new updated way of doing it would be early spring is generally the first opportunity, da-da-da. So we're deleting because it is a migratory bird, right? Okay, if we were to delete that small part of the sentence, now what does it mean? So if you say because it's a migratory bird, it's hard to observe it at this time. Okay, now you have a coherent reason for why bird watchers would be seeing it only at this time of the year, right? If I just eliminate that, early spring is generally the first opportunity to observe it. Okay, that's cool. You're telling me that this is the thing, but I don't understand why. So that's kind of the difference between them. Do you kind of hear that? So now I would go to the answer choices. Okay, A says details that indicate the reader what will eventually happen. I'm not seeing anything that's eventually going to happen, right? So I don't love A. B says the contrast between the appearance and the appearance of other birds. So if we delete because it's a migratory bird, we're not really talking about its appearance, right? So B doesn't really do much here. C, an example of one of the features that makes it a special bird. I guess you could say that, but being migratory isn't the most special in the world, right? There's quite a lot of birds that are migratory. So I would go with D there, an indication of why bird watchers would only see it during this time. Does that make sense, kind of? The hardest thing about this is kind of understanding what they're asking. So when it's asking specifically, the writer were to make this change, the essay would primarily lose what? So what that means is, what is the function of the part that I deleted? I know they've worded the essay would lose this or lose that, but what they're asking is, so the part that I deleted, what is that doing for me? And for here, I would say that part is indicating why the bird watchers would see the bird at this time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, awesome. That's a great example of a relevance or meaning question where it's asking specifically the relevance of this small part. And if I delete it, what happens? Well, you're losing a detail. So, great example. Are there any other ones?
Number 1.
Number 1. Perfect. Okay, number 1. Yeah, this is a really good question. I also immediately had a little bit of trouble with this because I was between A and C. So we're saying a family emergency took across the country for several weeks during spring of that year. Okay, it sounds okay to me. B is kind of bad, right? During a year. That's not the most descriptive in the world. C says this year, and then D, deleting it makes no sense, right? Because then it would read of year, which obviously not right. So we're between A and C here. Is that where you were also?
Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of just skipped it when I first was going through this. I've said this in the past a lot, but especially they'll sometimes throw in a stupid hard question 1, try to throw you out, and then people tend to do worse if they just get stuck on that. So my advice was to skip it, basically. So that's what I did, and then I finished reading it, and then I came back to question 1. And the reason I went with this instead of that is something that points to a specific, right? And you can only point to a specific if it's specified. So if it had said somewhere of that year, and then later in the passage it said, oh, that year is 2004, or that year was 2020, or whatever, then I think that would be okay. But because it doesn't specify exactly what year, I think this would be the better option. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that is a completely reasonable grammatical choice. It's just the fact that it doesn't specify. So when you have the word that, it needs to specify. And there's another place, actually, I'm going to jump to this one in case you guys don't ask it. But this one's very important. Number 9. Did anybody have trouble with number 9? I know I have trouble with this concept a lot still. Between that and which. Where do I use that? Where do I use which? This is tricky. So I just wanted to mention this because I don't always cover this rule when I'm doing all the different rules because it's so specific to these 2 words. But they like to use different vocabulary. So we already are aware of dependent and independent clauses, right? There's also something called a restrictive or non-restrictive clause. And the difference between those 2 things is, if I were to delete this, it still makes sense, right? That's a non-restrictive clause. So basically an independent clause. And if I were to delete said thing, and it doesn't make sense, that's a restrictive clause, or a dependent clause. You can call it that too. If I have a second clause, so I'm picking between that versus which. If I were to remove that or which whatever, and it's a non-restrictive clause, so the first part of it still makes sense, then that word I need to use is which. Now if I delete the second clause and it doesn't make sense, so it's a restrictive or dependent clause, then I need to use that. So in this case, let's cover that second half right there. So there was obviously a lack of real deterring qualities. Is that an acceptable sentence by itself? Yeah, you'd call that an independent clause? Or so then this whole thing is non-restrictive, right? So for that reason, you don't use that, you use which. Does that rule make sense now? I know this is something they don't really teach very often, and would that have helped if you guys knew that before? Yeah, okay. I might start adding that to my rules next time I do this, because I've always been kind of iffy on this one, because it doesn't come up too much, but I think people would probably benefit from this. So I might start teaching that more now, but that's the rule. That's why it's which and not that. And I know a lot of people, so you're not going to pick D, right, because that's a bad comma. But A is a pretty enticing option, right, because it's really close. So yeah, that's why it was B and not A. Did anybody have other ones that were tricky at all in any way?
Number 3.
Number 3. Let's look at that one. Okay. So which of the following... Did anybody else feel there was a lot of least acceptable, all good, except this, or not this? There was a lot of these types of questions in this one, right? There was like a very high percentage of these. That was weird. So that's not how the actual test is going to be. There might be a few here or there, but there was like 7 or 8 on this one. There's a lot. But anyway, okay. Which of the following alternatives least acceptable? So the alternatives we're looking for fit that sentence. Okay, only a serious family matter would have prompted, would have initiated, would have encouraged, or would have schemed such a departure. Prompted, initiated, encouraged, I feel all makes sense there. Schemed a departure is just not something I would say there. The other ones are synonyms of caused. prompted, initiated, or encouraged, you could use as synonyms of caused. I don't think you could use schemed as a synonym of caused. So even though those words to each other might be synonyms, the word we're looking for, the meaning we're looking for, is something that's a causal relationship. And I don't think you can't use schemed as a causal relationship. I think that's the idea there. So that's why D is the least acceptable word. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to point out a few funny ones also, if people are still thinking of questions. Number 5 is a funny one, because we talked about, so you don't repeat things, right? We made that a big deal. I gave you this hilarious example, right? And this happens a bunch of times. We arrived home 3 weeks later to witness an incredible transformation upon our return. Didn't we just say we arrived home? So why do we need to say upon our return, right? We don't. So that was a good example of, hey, don't repeat yourself, right? There's something, we've already said it, don't say it again. That happened a few other times, I want to say. Number 8 is a great example. Suddenly appeared comical and humorously purely decorative. Remember when I made that example about comical and humorous being in the same sentence? Don't ever do that. So another example of don't repeat yourself, right? Just say what you need to say and then move on. Is there any other ones I wanted to mention 14. This one's important. This is another kind of sort of rule. That's not a rule. But 14 is, did anybody struggle with this one? Even if you got it right, this is it takes a bit to figure out. The thing that gives it away is when you have so this is the difference between a dependent clause and like an introductory clause or a subordinating clause. Do you remember we used that word? A subordinating clause is something that describes the thing immediately after it. And there is a way you can go subordinating clause, comma, and then independent clause, right? So that's kind of the structure of the sentence we're dealing with here. And the subordinating clause here we're using is swift and beautiful leapers, or while they're swift and beautiful leapers, or whatever, right? So the thing that's special about a subordinating clause is when you have a subordinating clause, immediately after you need to say what you're describing. So here, if I say swift and beautiful leapers, what am I talking about? Who are swift and beautiful leapers? The deer, right? So I need to say swift and beautiful leapers, the deer something. And so here, F says, swift and beautiful leapers, the newness and appearance of the enclosure. Is the enclosure really good at being swift and like leaping? No. We're talking about the deer, right? So that's why in G you can see swift and beautiful leapers, the deer in our backyard should, and then whatever. Does that make sense? So that's the idea with this question, and I don't want to promise things because I'm not sure the ACT is really weird nowadays, but I'm like 90% sure one time out of the 75 you'll see a question like this, where it's purely testing, do you know what a subordinating clause is? Because all of them kind of sound okay, but one of them is grammatically correct. So that's the idea with that. Is there anything super important? 18 is not super important. If you want to look at it, go for it, but you don't have to. But this is a good example of the independent, fanboys independent rule. I promise you, this is a not 90% sure. This is 100% sure. Independent, fanboys independent, and the relationship between independent, fanboys dependent, right? We talked about that where one of them needs a comma, one of them doesn't. That was really important in the comma rules we did on the first day I was here. That will come up, I'm certain, and if you don't know that rule, you're going to hurt yourself by losing easy points. So if you don't know it, that's okay, you still have time, but please learn that rule. It's super important. You're definitely going to see that multiple times on the test. Don't want to leave easy points on the board. I know you all can do that. So practice it and make sure you know that one. And if you don't know it, it's completely okay. If you're unsure, just ask questions. But that's a really important rule. I need you guys to know that one. That's going to help you a lot.
Can we go over number 13?
13, yes. Given all the choices are true, which one provides the most specific detail that maintains the style and tone? Okay, so this is an example of a top-heavy question, right? And we talked about the two things you do with top-heavy questions: underline the revision task, forget everything else, right? So the revision task here, it's asking you to find the most detail and maintain the style and tone. So those are the two revision tasks we're following. Most detail, maintain the style. So the first thing I did was eliminate anything that's extremely not descriptive. So A is this new fence. No description, not specific. So I hate A. C, I don't love either. The taller enclosure, it's just not particularly descriptive. B, what does that say? Our newly erected sturdy fortress. Okay, that's fairly descriptive, so I'm okay with that. And then D, the rectangular area thoroughly enclosed by a chicken wire fence attached to the posts. That's pretty descriptive. That's pretty specific. So those two are kind of the two I'm picking between. So we've already narrowed down to specific detail. The other part of the revision task is maintain the style and tone. And I don't know if you guys heard this right away, but when you read answer choice D, it just sounds like a robot's reading it, right? The rectangular area thoroughly enclosed. This is like if you were explaining to an alien what a fence was. Like, this is a little too descriptive, and it doesn't particularly maintain the style. The style of this is, I mean, it's not super easy to describe, but it's definitely not that, right? That's really probably overly descriptive. So I would go with B here. It's specific detail, it's providing some description, but it's also not so much so that we're losing the style and tone. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I want to say there was one more I wanted to look at. Oh, 30. I just wanted to point to something really quick. 30 wasn't a crazy difficult question, but if you did get it wrong, don't worry, because this is actually a higher percentage miss question than it should be, because there's a certain thing that your brains do as humans. You have this amazing ability to just fix things when they're wrong without actually understanding them, because your brain is so fast. So sometimes when you don't slow down and you might be reading this, you might read this as the female and subsequent offspring are begging for him to keep singing. And you're like, oh, that's fine. Oh, that should be F. Let's move on. But actually what it says is they're begging him to keep singing, right? That's obviously, when you read it that way, it's, no, that's not right. But sometimes your brain will just correct things like this. And so I'm assuming most of you probably got this right, but if you didn't, it's fine, because if you picked F, it's really okay, because people do that and it's completely normal. That's what brains are meant to do. So this is just a good example or a good illustration of why you need to slow down sometimes and just be careful. So you might have something like that happen where you just accidentally autocorrect something when it's really wrong. Does that make sense? Okay. So I just wanted to point to that. Yeah. Does anyone have any other ones before we move on? For the most part, we felt okay about this. Okay. That's good. Let's do one more. We're kind of low on time here, so let's do one more. I'll put you under a bit of time pressure. Normally I give you 9 minutes, I'll give you 8. So let's go from 31 to 45. And again, you're going to use the bubble sheet. I'm going to call it 8 minutes. So when I'll give you a 30-second warning or something. So if you're not done, just start bubbling things and make sure that you fill out the sheet. So we're going to grade off the sheet. Does that make sense? Okay, 31 to 45. Go. Okay, there's 8 minutes. Sorry, I totally forgot to give you a 30 seconds warning. That's totally my bad. If anyone hasn't taken the test before, they'll give you a warning, but it's normally a 5-minute warning. Are they still doing that for those who took it recently? Okay, cool. So, yeah, you'll get a 5-minute warning, so you should probably, if you're not bubbling at that point, then maybe just fill in what you have to make sure that you have something on the paper, because they're not going to grade your work, they're going to grade the bubble sheet, right? So make sure all your answers are there. Okay, anyway. I'll read from 31 to 45, and then I'll do it again. Just look off your bubble sheet, okay? All right. 31. C, G, D, J, B. It's up to 35. Starting at 36. J, B, J, D, F. Starting at 41. A, J, C, F, D. Okay. So I'll open it up to you guys again. Are there any that were challenging through this one? Yeah, go ahead.
45.
Okay. I was hoping someone would ask that. 45, definitely tricky. So for the sake and logic of coherence, paragraph 4 should be placed where? Okay, so we're looking at paragraph 4. Controversy surrounds the end of Sacagawea's life. So what I kind of felt here is, okay, I'm in paragraph 3. This makes sense. She's reunited with her family. Forward. Okay, they're trudging forward with their mission. Okay, we're talking about the end of her life. Some people say she died here. Others say that she died here. Okay, it's fine. Paragraph 5. Most of the personal narratives of this trip refer to her. And now we're talking about the boat tipped onto its side. Okay, now this is weird, right? Because we talked about they trudged on with their trip. All of a sudden, she's dead, and now we're back on the trip. So something's weird here, right? So remember we talked about with organization, 2 things you can look for. You can look for kind of like pairs that fit together, dates, and then you can look for coherence. So if I'm going through like chronologically, okay, we trudged on with the trip, she died, and then now she's on the trip again. That's not right. So if we want this to make sense chronologically, she needs to die at the end. And so we'd put it kind of after paragraph 5, right? And then paragraph 6 is really just a concluding sentence. So for that reason, I would put it after 5 rather than where it is now or anywhere earlier. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's just kind of, it has to be chronological with her dying. That's kind of the whole idea. Okay. Any other ones? Yeah.
36.
36 was the other one I was hoping other people would ask. Great. You guys are doing great here. Okay. This one is particularly challenging because all of them are kind of choppy. Like, how do I figure out which one's good? They all seem grammatical. But this doesn't fit into the category, right, where I told you, hey, just put a subordinating clause close, right? So this is an organization of the words in a certain way. And there's 2 things you want to look for. Adjectives need to be close to the noun they're modifying. And then the other thing is, if you can help it, which this isn't required, but if you can help it, try to keep the verbs close together. It makes it easier for the reader. So those are the 2 criteria you're looking for. Adjective close to the noun that it's modifying. Verbs close if possible. So F, terrible, because the verbs are just not close at all, right? At age 16, she gave birth, and then after all this nonsense, her trek began shortly thereafter. So that's not ideal. It's probably okay if we can make it. G, her trek began shortly thereafter with her husband, westward. So westward is kind of describing, right? That's an adjective describing the direction. So the trek is all the way at the beginning and westward's all the way at the end. So it's not ideal because we want those close together, right? So G, not so good. H, began her trek shortly thereafter westward with her husband. Okay, that's okay, right? So we have trek westward close-ish. That's okay. And then J, shortly thereafter began her trek westward. So now we have shortly thereafter is immediately after the birth, right? And then we're talking about begin her trek westward. So trek westward right next to each other, right? The adjective right next to the noun. So I think that one would be the best. H and J are both okay. I like J better. I picked J, I'm pretty sure. Now I'm doubting myself. Let me go check and make sure that J is right. It could, theoretically, I think it could be H, but let's make sure. We're at question number 36. Let's see what they say. 36 is J, the most logical arrangement. While H does keep the two verbs closest, its construction is too awkward to be the best answer choice, is what the book thinks. So, yeah, that's kind of what we stumbled on, right? It just feels kind of weird. I don't love the westward being... It just sounds choppy, right? That's kind of... I don't know if there's a rule to describe that better. It's just really choppy. So J. But those are the two criteria. Does that make sense? You want adjectives and nouns really close, and if you can help it, verbs close. Make sense? Okay. I know we haven't talked about that before, but the adjective thing, very important. If you can help it, keep adjectives close to nouns. That's going to make things very easy and coherent for the reader. Were there any other ones that jumped out in this? This one was a decent difficulty, I would say, relative to the actual test. It's not so much easier like this book tends to be. So, pleased with that. And then, if you get a chance before... is anyone taking the test coming up here? Like, soon? A few? Okay, yeah. If you want to, these last few passages would be good practices, since we've already gone through most of it. And then there is like a little table. I don't know if you guys use the table very often, but there's a table at the end of the actual test that tells you how many questions you got right. It's on page 654, in case anyone wants to look. This is how you figure out the relative difficulty of a test and a table like this. And so it'll give you a number of questions correct and then correlate that to a score on the test. So on this one, if you had missed no questions, you would have got a 36. And if you had missed one question, you would have got a 35. So that makes it sound like this test was pretty easy, it thinks. If you missed a question, they're already knocking you down. So they think this test was fairly easy. And so if you get through all 5 of them, then you can see a relative number and kind of get an estimate for where you could be at. Again, I'm not advocating for this book being the best because it sometimes runs a little bit easy. And then just because you're taking the test and it's scary and there's all these different factors, you're in a new place, you practice here with me or at home, it's different. So normally what you're getting in this book is going to be inflated by just a few points. So keep that in mind. But yeah, everyone's okay with the practice we did today. And now you know what to do. You practice with a bubble sheet. Okay, awesome.